Peegs.com, Jared Kelly, Matt Weaver, 2 days out from Indiana football spring practice, the first under new head coach Kurt Cignetti. Matt, let's start with the big news. Just dropped last night. Philip Bleedy, obviously, supposed to be a big part of Indiana's defensive line room, defensive tackle. He is in the portal as a grad transfer. I did want to touch on that first because obviously it was kind of a surprise announcement, and Indiana is already very thin at that position going in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything any more shocking in this portal and NIL era, but it was to me. It's what's so surprising is the timing. They just came off of I think IU was on spring break last week, and so this is their first week back. So it's just the timing's so odd. You're what a little more than 2 months into the semester academically, and that was probably about almost 2 months to go, I guess, or a little less than that. So it's just odd timing. He's yeah, I'm obviously. I guess he would stay at IU. I'm not sure what his class schedule is, but I would assume he's in classes and he'll have to stay there till he's done and then move on to somewhere else. But yeah, the timing to me is what's so surprising about this, and then just the decision. It seemed like he was a guy that was all in. I mean, I think he put out a video.
Yeah.
I can't remember when it was, but like kind of like a return type video not that long ago. But like I said, in the portal and NIL era, it's kind of the wild, wild west. So who knows? But yeah, it's like you said, this is easily the thinnest position group on the roster, D tackle. So it's not just a hit from a talent standpoint and experience standpoint, but it's a hit from as far as you've only got this spring you've got one guy who's played basically any significance at Marcus Spurs because James Carpenter will be out. So I guess the silver lining is a lot of guys are going to get good reps, but these are guys you probably weren't expecting to play a ton this fall.
We talked about this at the top of this recording. Obviously, defensive tackle Philip Bleedy no longer on the roster. He will be graduate transferring, most likely at least. He could come back, I suppose. But James Carpenter, the James Madison transfer, super productive. He won't play, at least participate that much this spring as he's coming back from offseason injuries. So you're really left with Marcus Burrs, Robbie Harrison, Jamari Monet, and then the early enrollee freshman Mario Landino. Like you said, Matt, this is a really thin group. Do you expect them to add more? You'd have to expect they're going to add more after the spring practice period.
Oh, I expected them to add more before Philip Bleedy
Yeah.
went into the portal. So I think, maybe instead of adding, one guy, I think you try to get at least one. Now maybe you're looking at two, and maybe more if you have the roster spots because I mean, obviously D tackle is a physical position. You get banged up. I mean, and you got to be able to rotate guys, especially in this day and age of offenses that play with pace and tempo. You want to be able to run guys in and out and keep them as fresh as possible. So, it's going to be to me. This is the big spring. I know the former staff was very high on Marcus Burris. They thought he had next level potential. This is his chance. I think working with a guy with like Pat Kuntz, he's coaching the D tackles and a guy who's really developed players. This is his opportunity to really step up. Robbie Harrison's another guy. And then you got a younger guy, Jamari Monet, who's not played at all. And then Landino comes in. The key for him is can he add the necessary size? That's a tough adjustment, but coming in, early does give him a chance to at least maybe, have a chance to get on the field this fall for some snaps. You hopefully would like to redshirt him to give him that extra year, or if you do play him only 4 games so we can preserve that red shirt. But yeah, this group was already pretty thin, and now it's razor thin. So, you do have some guys to build around in James Carpenter and Burris, but these young guys, and then who can you add? A couple, 1, 2 guys, maybe 3 if you can. It's not going to be easy. This is a position everybody's looking for D tackles. So, hopefully they got the necessary compensation, if you will, to find some guys that can come in and help them this fall.
Yeah, if there's one maybe feather in the cap that IU has here, it's obviously Pat Kuntz. You mentioned, a terrific talent about developer, evaluator. Was one of the top assistants last year, James Madison. So you got to figure that he'll be able to find some guys in the portal coming this summer. Let's go to stay on the defensive line. We'll go to the edge spot. I know they're kind of introducing different terms and names, but essentially these guys are all defensive ends, edge rushers, whatever you want to call them. Linnell Carr getting him back is huge. It looks like Jacob Megan Farrar is going to move to the edge from sort of an off-ball linebacker that he was last year. You bring in Mikhail Kamara from James Madison. He was super productive there. And then some young guys who are really looking to take next step. Benson Snead, Tadarius Collins. Just what do you see out of this position group? Obviously, there's some returning production, but there's also a lot of unknowns too.
Yeah, this is a position I think that is. I mean, obviously, you'd always take another edge rusher. I think it's in pretty good shape. I mean, obviously, getting Carr back, you add Kamara. Carr's I think going to be limited in the spring, but Kamara was super productive at James Madison. I think he's got. They call the bull position what IU called the bull. The old I used to have called the bull position. They call it stud. I think it's a similar type role how they use it. I mean, I think he's got experience playing both. I think he's probably more with Carr, maybe you put him more on the other side, but he can do both. Vincent Snead's a guy that I think this new staff seems really high on. I think he is also going to be a little bit limited, which is a bit of a bummer because he hasn't played a ton, and you kind of like for him to get those reps, but obviously he's got to get healthy. Tadarius Collins is a guy that I'm really intrigued by. He was a really nice recruit out of Louisiana when they got him. He's a guy they recruited for the bull spot or the now called stud spot, the new defense. But he might be able to play some strong side DN. So, and then Ndikwe is another early enrollee. He was a guy that was committed to James Madison and flipped to IU. The words I've heard describe him are freak. Now he's obviously going to have to get bigger, but he's got that quick twitch and that explosiveness that you love to have on the edge. So, I won't be shocked if they add somebody, if they could find somebody post spring ball out of the portal. But I think this spot is in pretty decent shape. Obviously injuries can kind of wreck that, but if they can stay healthy, I think you've got a good mix of some veteran guys. And then also that other guy, I don't know if he's, I think he's still on the roster, Trey Lange. I might be wrong on that, but if he's coming back, he could be a designated pass rusher for you. We'll see what he's got, but there's some talent here and there is some experience. So it's not quite like D tackle where you got one guy and a bunch of unknowns. You've got multiple guys who played, and so something to build around. So it'll be interesting. But like I said, if a good pass rusher becomes available, I think they would definitely be interested.
Yeah, you definitely got to take. Can never have too much edges as we've seen here at Indiana. Let's move to linebacker here. This is also a spot where a lot of new faces. You lose Aaron Casey, which is obviously not going to be very easy to fill. But Indiana thinks that is obviously comfortable with the guy they brought in, Jaden McDonald from Troy, Jalen Walker, Aiden Fisher, both from James Madison. They were both played extensive snaps there last year. And then Josh Rudolph, Daryl Minor coming back. When you look at this group, 8 guys coming in for the spring, there is some talent here, some proven production, which Kurt Sinagny wanted, but you also just don't really know what you're going to get. With the newcomers, jumping up a level to the Big Ten is obviously a jump too.
Yeah, Jalen Walker, Jaden McDonald, Aiden Fisher were 3 of the best linebackers in the Sun Belt, but obviously it is a jump up in competition. I think those are the 3 guys that you kind of build around. You got some guys who played. Caden Turner, he's played a little bit. Isaiah Jones didn't really play much last year, but a couple years ago got a little bit of playing time. This is another position. It's kind of like DN. I like what they have. Obviously staying healthy. You can say it about every position. It's kind of redundant. Staying healthy is the key. But I do think they've got some guys there. I mean, this is a position where I think they're probably set. I wouldn't expect them to add a linebacker unless there's attrition, which could always happen. You never know. So it'll be interesting to see, how that shakes out. One guy that I'm really intrigued by, he won't be here till the summertime, but Quentin Clark out of Georgia is a really, really talented guy. I think he missed a lot of his senior year, had an injury, but this is a guy that once they get him in, he obviously going to have to get bigger, but he can really run, a space player, which is important in today's game at linebacker. So especially when you're playing 2 linebackers, which is pretty much what this defense is, kind of like the old defense. It's a 4-2-5. You need those guys who can play in space. So I'm really intrigued by him. I'm not saying he's going to play this year, but you never know. I think he's a guy that could come in and maybe open some eyes and push for playing time. But I think those 3 guys I mentioned, then also I forgot to mention Rudolph, who came in last year from Austin Peay, got playing time later in the season. I think he's another guy that'll be a foundational piece, hopefully, as a senior that you can kind of lean on. But I think this is a pretty good group. But like you said, there are a little bit of unknowns because we haven't seen them do this against Penn State, Michigan, name a Big Ten school. It's different than going against, Middle Tennessee or or whoever it is that they're playing in that conference, which is a good conference, but it is a step up big time in competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's one thing you can kind of hang your hat on here with the linebacker group is there's a lot of them are seniors, juniors too, so they do have a ton of playing experience under their belts, which should especially Jalen Walker, Aiden Fisher coming back, staying in the same system under Brian Haynes, that should help them a lot too, as Indiana kind of makes this transition with their defense. All right, let's move to defensive backs here. We'll start at cornerback. This is a group I really like a lot. You lose Jordan Shaw, which is, he was obviously very promising as a true freshman. But you bring back basically your entire cornerback room outside of Jordan Shaw. Kobe Minor's there, JoJo Johnson, Jamari Sharp. You have a ton of guys. Nick Toomer is kind of a tweener there. We don't know if he's going to end up at safety or cornerback, but you have to like that cornerback room with the amount of returning experience you're getting.
Absolutely. And Jameer Johnson's a guy that kind of got banged up last year. And I think he would have figured more prominently, if that didn't happen. JoJo Johnson literally showed up like 2 days before fall camp. I mean, he didn't get any kind of summer work, that's important for him. So he was kind of always behind. I think he's a little bit banged up this spring, or not banged up, but coming back from an injury. So, but I mean, I do like this room. I think Jamari Sharp is the guy that I know he had some mishaps last year and out on the field, but this is a guy that has a ton of talent. He's got the length, everything you're looking for in a corner. Obviously, Josh Philliston is coming in. Dontre Henderson, another freshman. You hopefully don't have to count on them, but they are some guys that have talent. Toomer is an interesting one because he could play corner or safety, which maybe that makes him a fit for that their hybrid role that they have. In their defense. So, but I think between these guys, I'm with you. This is kind of another under the radar strength position, that maybe hasn't been as much for the last couple of years. Maybe not since the 20 season when Taiwan had that great year and they had all those guys, Reese Taylor and those guys all played really well. I think this is a position group where they've got a lot of talent, and I think they got a chance to be pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Are there any guys here? You obviously mentioned, Jamari Sharp. Do you think any of the freshmen might be able to make an impact? Josh Philliston was obviously, one of the bigger guys in the class, bigger recruits, I should say. Any of these guys that stand out to you as maybe being able to kind of rise on the depth chart?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Philliston, he's got to get bigger. Which is the case for a lot of guys. I think Henderson was hurt some last year, so where's he at physically? I would assume I remember, I think he told me he was 100%. But it's a big step up. I mean, I guess, you're playing at that level. Even Josh Wilson, who played in South Florida, he's going against really good players, but still every week you're going against potential NFL guys, especially when you get in the Big Ten season. So I think I wouldn't, like I said, every spot's going to be open. If these guys come in and they prove they can play, they'll have a chance. But I think, if you're Rod Ojong, the corners coach, you really hope you can lean on a Kobe Minor, a JoJo Johnson, Jameer Johnson, Jamari Sharp, and even if depending on where they put Nick Toomer, maybe him as well. And then you kind of bring these other guys along. That's one thing that's great about that 4-game rule. Maybe you can get them out there. Especially with the non-conference schedule being very, very manageable this year. Those are 3 games where maybe you can get guys a bunch of snaps just so they get a taste of college football and then not have to play them more than that. But like I said, I'm with you. I like this position. I think they got a chance to be. I think the ceiling's high for this group of players.
Mm-hmm. Do you think they add any more to obviously they're looking to add to safety, but do you think they add any more to cornerback in the portal?
No, I mean, if you could add a guy like who's similar to Nick Toomer who could maybe do both, maybe you do that. I think safety. I mean, if it's all things are equal, you're going to pick the guy who's more of a safety than a corner. But if he can do both, I mean, having that versatility is great, especially when it's football is a passing game. People are throwing the ball all over the place. So the more guys you can have that can cover and hit, the better. So if you get a guy who can do both, play down in the box and maybe be strong against the run, but also, cover slots or cover, guys on the outside, all the better. But, if I think they're definitely going to try it. I mean, Kurt Cinetti's been publicly, not just in his office, publicly has said that safety is a position where they need to, maybe add some other guys. So if that guy can play corner, great. If not, at least try to shore up that safety position, which I know we're going to talk about here in just a sec.
Mm-hmm. Rounding out the defensive backs here in the secondary, safety is a position that Indiana obviously went after hard in the portal. They're going to try to go after hard in the portal coming out of spring camp. But there are some pieces here. Josh Anguinetti comes back. Tariq McDaniel comes back as well. They added Terry Jones from Old Dominion and Sean Asbury as well. Two guys who played a ton, produced a ton last year in the Sun Belt Conference. When you look at this group, Matt, it's you don't really know what you're going to get here, especially depth wise. But you could look at some of these guys and say, there is some potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll start with the glasses half full part of this position. I think the top of the group, and what I mean by that is the guys who you expect to be in the two deep. There's experience with Sam Eddie, Asbury, Terry Jones, McDaniel played a little bit. Even Amari Farrell, who came in last year, he got some playing time. The problem is if somebody goes down, who do you turn to? Bryson's Bonds has mainly been a special teams player. Doesn't mean he can't do it, but he hasn't so far. Until you do it, you don't know. And then you got Jaja Boyd coming in. He'll be in summertime and then in default camp. Obviously a really talented guy, but that once again, it's a lot to ask a freshman to come out there and give you a bunch of snaps. So, I think what you need is you just need to shore up the depth and, and find out, who can be your top 4 or 5 guys at this position. So, I mean, I like the guys they brought in. I mean, if you go by, was it Pro Football Focus? I think Asbury is one of the highest rated. I think it was him as one of the highest rated guys. I think maybe in all of college football, not just the Sun Belt where he played. He's probably going to be at that hybrid position, that 50B spot. So, and then Terry Jones, the guy that's got experience at Old Dominion. And then, like we mentioned, Sam Winetti, he's kind of been a guy that's kind of had a little bit of a roller coaster career at Indiana, but he's got talent. So it's just, finding those top 4 or 5 guys, but they're going to have to shore up the depth. And then, Amari Farrell is the guy that the old staff was looking to maybe move to they called it stinger linebacker, the weak side linebacker. I think now you probably try to keep him at safety at all possible. And maybe he kind of plays closer to the line of scrimmage in that hybrid role. But he's a guy that I think he showed some last year and ceiling's high, but depth is an issue. I don't think it's as bad as a D tackle. But this is probably the second thinnest position, maybe on the entire roster and certainly on defense.
Yeah, we've heard Kurt Zanetti say he's looking to add more there. You mentioned the rover position, which is sort of the hybrid. I don't know if you want to call it nickel. Last year, Indiana had the Husky, obviously. Can you kind of give the viewers kind of a rundown of what that position is and who might fit in there?
Well, basically, I mean, teams have been playing nickel defenses for years. It's just, somewhat recently where teams have, because everybody's now in 3 and 4 wide receivers, teams, usually your base defense used to be, if you played a 4-man front, 3 linebackers. Well, now base defenses anymore. I mean, this is even carried over into the NFL. I mean, I know you're from Chicago. I'm a Colts fan. Kenny Moore just got paid and he's a slot corner. I mean, 10 years ago, slot corners were making, you just recycle them. He's getting $10 million a year. Because he's really good at what he does and because he plays an important position. So it's basically you're a slot corner, slot safety. It just depends on, it may depend on what, who you're playing and what the call is. I know the old staff, they recruited guys specifically for Husky early on. Then they kind of switched up and they just basically recruited defensive backs. And then they kind of targeted guys who he could be a Husky, but he could also be a safety or maybe, Tywone Mullen in 20 was basically when he made all those plays, blitzing and stuff, he was playing. Now, he didn't like the Huskies. If you remember, he didn't like the Husky term. He liked to be called a nickel, but he was basically playing nickel DB is what he was doing when he was blitzing off the edge and all that. So I think you'll see the guy do that. I mean, you're obviously covering slot. You're probably covering the tight end some. If you get a guy who can blitz and go in there, you'll see him doing that. But, this is a guy that's got to be able to play in space, but he's also got to be able to tackle. So, that's why you kind of look more towards a safety than a corner, just because fair or unfair, safeties are known to be more physical than corners. So that's why you kind of lean that direction for that guy. But if you can get a guy who can really cover, and Tywone, even though he was smaller, was a physical player. He didn't mind, hitting guys. So he could cover and obviously he could hit. If you could find somebody like that, that'd be great. But, I think that in that position, probably the number one thing is, a guy who can play up close to the line of scrimmage, play in the box, and help out in the run game, and then hopefully also get out in space and cover guys down the field.
Mhm. You have to think that, Mari Farrell's one of those guys, underclassman obviously, but played a lot last year. Was one of the only guys to exceed the 4 game red shirt. You'd have to think that he is kind of a prime candidate to at
Yeah.
least groomed for the future there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say of these guys, I think, like I said, I think Asbury's a guy who fits perfectly in that kind of in that rover role. But I think Amari Farrell, he gives you a different, what's Asbury? That he's listed what 5'9", 5'10", about 100. So he's put together. He's not. He's just a smaller guy. Farrell's 6'1" and a half, 6'2",
Yeah.
longer. So it's two different body types. So maybe if you're, it's maybe you put Farrell in certain situations where you feel like maybe it's going to be more of a run, or you want a more physical guy. I'm not saying Asbury can be, but he's a little bit smaller. And then Asbury, but I think you got some movable pieces. And like I said, I'm really intrigued when Jaja Boyd gets here. What does he look like? Because he was a really talented guy on both sides of the ball. He's being recruited to play to this rover spot, and it looks like he could be a guy that could be a perfect fit for it. Just needs to add the size and strength and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think Amari Farrell is a good guy to look at. Is he could be the future at this position in this defense for these guys, assuming he can stay. I don't want to say small enough, but not get too big, not outgrow the spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll be the whole secondary in general is should be a lot of intrigue here in the spring. Obviously, we'll see some players rise here as well on the depth chart. All right, before we wrap things up, Matt, special teams. Indiana went out and added Derek McCormick. He is a scholarship kicker, which is kind of a surprise to some, I know. But obviously, you give competition there to Nico Radicic, who didn't really play last year. Don't really know what you're going to get out of him. McCormick obviously has playing experience over a couple of years. And then you bring James Evans back at punter, and then Mark Langston as the transfer long snapper. It's mainly the kickers here that is probably the most intriguing this spring with Radicic and McCormick.
Yeah, it was a little bit eye-opening when they brought him in, McCormick, that is, as a scholarship guy. And my understanding is they do like Radish. I think this is one of those deals where they want to go with two kickers to try, so you don't have one guy and you wear him out, especially a young guy in Radicic who didn't, like you said, I think he was hurt in fall camp last year, didn't really start practicing until not too long before the start of the season. He's obviously a highly rated guy by the kicking people and was an Army All-American, if I remember right, coming out of high school. So he's got talent, but it's an unknown. So McCormick gives you a guy, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of those deals where he's kind of the kickoff guy and maybe does like field goals of like 50 yards or more. And then Radicic's kind of a guy that maybe he's extra points and 40, 45 yards and in. I mean, that's kind of how that could work out. So but like you said, James Evans is obviously one of the top punters in the Big Ten. He's proven that. Langston's a proven long snapper. So to me, like you said, kickers where there's kind of the intrigue and kind of the unknown. But I think they've got an older guy who's got some production, and then you got a young guy with a ton of potential. So I think the kicking game should be okay. What I'm really intrigued by special teams is, Jalen Lucas was phenomenal as a punt returner. I'm sorry, as a kick returner, didn't do as well as a punt returner. Who are those return guys now? Because that's going to be a big thing. I mean, that's those are the kind of plays that can flip a game in your favor. So, who's back there and how they do on that. And then the cover units, can they struggled last year for IU. Can they be better this year?
Mm-hmm. Do you have any, I was going to ask about the return men, obviously punt returner, kick returner. You'd have to think they're going to kind of change up who they're going to use at both spots. Do you have any guys that you think could emerge there? A lot of the newcomers from old schools did a lot of that. Keyshawn Williams did a lot of returning. Miles
Yeah.
Price did some returning. Even David Holloman a couple of years ago was a kick returner for IU. Any guys there in particular that you're kind of keeping your eye on?
Yeah, those guys, I mean, because typically your returners are skill guys and guys that are used to catching the ball, receivers. Maybe you have a running back. I mean, obviously that's Jalen Lucas. I mean, Tevin Coleman, before he broke out as a running back his freshman year, I think took one or two kickoffs back for touchdowns. That was kind of how he first got noticed at IU. So it's those kind of guys. So that's what I look for. Keyshawn Williams, like I said, Miles Price, those guys, and obviously as a kick return is a little bit different because you're going to get a running head start. You got blockers, punt returners making that first or second guy miss when he's bearing down on you. So maybe a guy who's a little bit more, agile is maybe more quick than fast. Jay Sean Harris a couple years ago comes to mind. He was probably more quick than fast. He was so good at making the first two guys miss and then getting downfield. And then he had that one year where he was phenomenal taking punts back. So, Miles Price kind of, to me, fits that mold. of a guy who might be a productive punt returner for you. But you know, uh, it's an important position, and the biggest thing is obviously not making a mistake with the ball once it's coming to you and turning it over. But if you can have a guy who can give you a return, get you from the 25 to the 50, or if you get it around the 45 and take it back even for a touchdown, obviously those are huge plays. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because we kind of knew going into last year what the return game would look like. We're all waiting to see what it looks like for 24.
Mm-hmm. We'll wrap things up here, Matt. Kind of going into spring camp, one position on defense, one position group on offense that you're, most, keep your eye on the most.
Well, I would say, defensively, I would say how things shake out at safety. I mean, D tackle obviously, but I mean, there's when you look at the roster, there's only a couple guys that right now you figure you would think would be getting a ton of playing time in the fall because you figure they're going to add some guys to that mix at D tackle. Same thing at safety, but I do think there's, I'm interested to see how these guys from the Sun Belt Conference, Asbury, Terry Jones, how these guys, and then I mean, I know you said one in the linebacker because those are all Sun Belt guys too that they brought in for this, how those guys adjust, to this competition. But the secondary is so important in today's day and age of football because teams are throwing it so much. Now, obviously, what you really hope is the guys up front make their jobs a lot easier. But I'll be looking at the secondary and how they kind of, move those guys around and what it looks like offensively. I mean, quarterback, that's the easy answer. I'm going to be looking at O-line, just because I like what they have, but where do they have guys? Do they keep, we won't know with Kidwell because he won't practice, but like his Stevens, do they pop him in? Does Trey Wedding, go in? Where's Austin Barrett? I know I had heard Bostad is really, really high on him. The old staff is very high on him. Is he a guy that, does he get in the mix? So, because to me, games are still won up front on both sides of the ball. And, if this O-line can come together and show the improvement they showed last year under Coach Bostad, this offense has a chance to be really good. Mm-hmm. They've got all the pieces skill wise, but it's obviously up front's where it's got to be done. And if they can do that, they've got tons of weapons at wide receiver, at running back. And I think that a guy at tight end you can count on is Zach Horton. So I would say O-line in the secondary for me.
Mm-hmm. A huge spring camp coming up. We say this every year. Every spring camp is huge, but this one more than ever with Curt Cignetti coming in and leading the Hoosiers into the 2024 season. Matt, we'll have much more to come on Peegs.com. I know you'll be there for all the spring practice, all the press conferences and stuff, as will I. So we'll see how things shake out. It should be super interesting over the next few months. The spring game is obviously open to the public. Hey, return of a spring game. That's also cool as well. So we'll see kind of what happens here over the next few weeks and months. Indiana starts spring practice on Thursday, March 21st, and runs through the end of April, I believe it is. So we'll have much more to come on Peegs.com. For Matt Weaver, thanks for joining me. Jarek Hill, we'll see you guys over on the sites.